for you is that, to the surprise of many, including, I'll be honest, myself, the Supreme Court has denied Donald Trump's bid to stay his criminal sentence. He is scheduled to be sentenced tomorrow to no jail time, but as of tomorrow, he will officially be sentenced for the 34-count felony conviction in New York. The Supreme Court asked and answered. They have said no to Donald Trump's bid to stay his...
The argument on immunity is very important. The president has to have immunity. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with a president in the future for 100 years from now. If you don't have immunity, you're not going to do anything. You're going to become a ceremonial president. You're just going to be doing nothing. You're not going to take any of the risks, both good and bad. I mean, you're going to make some great decisions and save the country. You're going to make some decisions which are unfortunate, but that's the way it is. But you're not going to do anything if you don't have immunity, because otherwise you're going to be prosecuted after you leave office for doing something like going into an area, going into a country, doing lots of things that you wouldn't be doing. And we don't want a ceremonial president. We have to have a real...
Trump just took a massive hit, and this time, there's no easy way out. The Supreme Court, yes, the very one he worked so hard to shape, just delivered a ruling that destroys his last hope of avoiding accountability. It's a decision so impactful it could rival the most shocking moment in a reality TV finale. Word of the ruling spread fast, and let's just say Trump did not handle it well. Picture him at Mar-a-Lago, surrounded by half-empty Diet Coke cans and Big Mac wrappers, when the news breaks. His face turns red, redder than usual, his fists clench, and for a moment, it looks like he might explode from sheer frustration. But instead of flames, we get something much more predictable, an avalanche of all-caps social media rants. The tweets come fast and furious, filled with words like disgrace and sad, each one carrying the energy of a full-blown meltdown. His most devoted followers immediately jump in, spinning wild conspiracy theories. Maybe the justices were bribed. Maybe the deep state is behind it. Maybe Obama hacked their brains. The chaos takes over, and right in the middle of it all, Trump plays his usual role, leading the charge, stirring the outrage, and refusing to accept defeat. This version keeps the essence of the original while making it more polished, engaging, and natural for a wide audience. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks.
Legal breakdown. Glenn, we've been talking about these court cases that Trump's been contending with for quite a while now. Finally, another one has just made its way up to the Supreme Court. We have a pretty surprising ruling here. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, this I view as the first test of whether the Supreme Court will let Donald Trump's sort of appetite for dictatorship, his abuse of power, go completely unchecked. And at least today, 5 Supreme Court justices said, no, we're going to be a legitimate check on Donald Trump's sort of, desire for uncontrolled.
Real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
Trump sat stone-faced, stoic, looking down as the verdict was read in court as he heard the jurors affirm the verdict. Guilty, 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 34 times.
Back at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's confidence is crumbling. The Supreme Court, the very institution he once believed was on his side, has just handed him a crushing legal defeat. This isn't just another roadblock, it's a total game-changer. The usual tricks, stalling, loopholes, endless legal maneuvers, aren't saving him this time. For the first time ever, Trump is facing something he's spent his entire life dodging, real consequences.
Supreme Court is not taking Juan Merchan out of his chair as he considers whether and when he will sentence Donald Trump for the 34 felony count conviction in New York, nor are they going to disturb the gag order that Judge Merchan put in place over a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago, against Donald Trump in that matter. That in a new ruling by Justice Alito, of all things.
On taking office, I imposed an immediate freeze on all federal hiring, a freeze on all new federal regulations, and a freeze on all...
This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a legal earthquake. A ruling so massive that even top lawyers were left scrambling. Trump had been counting on a last-minute lifeline, hoping the justices he appointed would come through for him. After all, hadn't they ruled in favor of conservatives before? Wasn't this supposed to be his legal safety net? But the Supreme Court had other ideas. The decision hit like a gavel of finality, proving that no matter how carefully power is stacked, it doesn't always go according to plan. Trump expected loyalty, but what he got was a harsh reality check. Justice doesn't answer to just one man.
Very important that the Supreme Court recognize that what he's doing is a delaying tactic, and that the American people, it cannot be the case that a president of the United States can attempt to overturn an election and seize power, and that our justice system is incapable of holding a trial, of holding him to account before the next election. That cannot.
I want to start by thanking the Supreme Court for its unanimous decision today. It was a very important decision. We're very well crafted, and I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially.
Whatever legal loopholes Trump was clinging to, claims of immunity, challenges to his eligibility, last-minute technicalities, were wiped out in an instant by the Supreme Court's ruling. The message couldn't be clearer: he is not above the law. You could almost hear the stunned silence from his inner circle as the reality set in like a freight train. And now, the stage is set. The U.S. Supreme Court has officially agreed to hear Trump's immunity case. The date? April 22nd.
United States Supreme Court has just announced that it will hear Donald Trump's immunity case. It will hear that case on April 22nd.
This is a momentous decision just to hear this case. There was no reason in this world for the Supreme Court to take this case. Under the Constitution and the laws of the United States, there's never been an argument that a former president is immune from prosecution for crimes that he committed while in office. The Supreme Court is capable of deciding this very quickly in time that the former president could be tried.
For Donald Trump, it is about a justification of his actions leading up to that day and on that day. There has been no acknowledgement of any wrongdoing. Instead, he has justified his responses in those hours after. And when we talk about the appeals court in their ruling this week that he does not have, did not have presidential immunity, Donald Trump was asked an important question by our colleague Dasha Burns, who was down there at Mar-a-Lago, and that was the extent to which a president is bound constitutionally from any actions that he or she chooses to take from the Oval Office. And his answer was very striking. He said that a president should be allowed to do whatever he or she sees fit, and even included, quote, he can do really bad things for our country. So on one hand, Donald Trump is justifying his actions on the January 6th, the day of the January 6th, 2021 attack.
Trump was furious, but that was no surprise. What really stood out was his legal team. Already experts at looking worn out, they somehow managed to appear even more defeated. This was supposed to be his big moment, the case that would prove his invincibility. Maybe he had convinced himself that the justices would shut it all down on a technicality, or better yet, rule in his favor unanimously, complete with an apology for the trouble. Instead, he got the legal equivalent of a trapdoor opening beneath him.
News just coming in from the Supreme Court. I want to get straight over to CNN's Caitlin Polans, who's pulling together the details from us. And this has to do with President Trump's moves to freeze foreign aid. Caitlin, what's happened?
Yeah, Kate, what had happened in the Trump administration is they turned off money going to nonprofits and contractors on foreign aid, people that were working with the organization USAID, the agency that the Trump administration was trying to shut down. And what the Supreme Court, what Trump wanted to do is he wanted a green light from the Supreme Court to keep that money shut off. It's being litigated at the trial level courts far below the Supreme Court.
Trump spent years convincing himself that the courts were just another arm of his power, no different from his lawyers, political allies, or devoted online followers. But courts don't run on loyalty or campaign promises. They run on precedent, law, and, every so often, common sense. This ruling didn't just deny his argument, it shattered the illusion entirely. As reality set in, the meltdown began. No amount of bluster, delay tactics, or conspiracy theories could save him now. Aides whispered nervously. His lawyers avoided eye contact. Somewhere, a golf cart was probably taking the brunt of his frustration. Truth Social exploded into chaos, wild accusations, furious rants, and at least 3 posts claiming this would never happen in Russia, but for once, even Trump couldn't escape the truth. He couldn't fire the Supreme Court. He couldn't strong-arm them into silence. The walls weren't just closing in, inside Mar-a-Lago, they had already crumbled. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before shattering like a cheap chandelier.
Donald Trump said he could assassinate his political opponents when he was president. He could stage a coup. And people thought that that was hyperbole and over the line. It is time we start to take him literally and seriously, because today, a majority of the U.S. Supreme Court did just that. In fact, Donald Trump, if returned to the White House and in the Oval Office, assassinates his political opponents as part of a plan to effectuate what he believes is federal law. If he stages a coup and cites a provision of the U.S. Constitution, he will in fact be.
They knew this moment was coming, but nothing could have fully prepared them for the Category 5 Trump meltdown now unfolding. Phones started ringing. Shell-shocked lawyers exchanged nervous glances, each silently hoping they wouldn't be the one stuck explaining the ruling in terms simple enough to avoid another explosion. Meanwhile, in another room, Melania reportedly glanced at the TV, sighed, and went back to scrolling on her phone. She had seen this episode before. Trump, however, was in full fury mode. I warned them all. Fired. He bellowed, seemingly forgetting that Supreme Court justices, unlike contestants on The Apprentice, can't be dismissed with a dramatic point of the finger. When someone tried to explain this, he ignored them, instead launching into a fresh conspiracy theory right in real time that it was a setup. All against me. Kavanaugh, traitor. Gorsuch, never trusted him. Barrett, a total disaster. Ironically, these were the very justices he had personally chosen, expecting their loyalty. But the real panic wasn't in the tweets or the tantrum, it was happening behind the scenes.
And as you know, they acknowledge what the judge said about no penalty, and there's no penalty, but we're going to appeal anyway, just psychologically, because frankly, it's a disgrace. It's a judge that shouldn't have been on the case. He's a highly conflicted judge, and they called for an appeal. So I read it, and I thought it was a fair decision, actually. So I'll do my little thing tomorrow. They can have fun with their political opponent. As you know, I'm under a gag order from a judge. This is the first.
Trump's advisors scrambled to contain the fallout, but what could they even say? That the ruling was actually a good thing? That Biden was somehow behind a decision made by justices Trump himself appointed? Even they knew there were limits to how much they could spin this. The so-called damage control meeting quickly fell apart into murmured complaints, stress-fueled coffee chugging, and at least one staffer frantically Googling, how to overturn a Supreme Court decision fast. Then came the social media meltdown. Aides had mere seconds to snatch up their devices before Trump unleashed a digital tirade that made his January 6th tweets sound like Sesame Street life lessons. Meanwhile, a dedicated team rushed to conservative media outlets with pre-approved talking points. Significant constitutional concerns have been raised by this ruling. Today is a dark day for democracy. The real crime here is how they are treating President Trump. Even Fox News seemed unsure how to respond. Should they defend the Supreme Court? Stick with Trump? Some hosts hesitated. Others awkwardly stalled with a commercial break, waiting to see which way the political winds would blow. And so, Mar-a-Lago spiraled further into chaos.
Losing in a major way at the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. He is facing what is a blow to one of the strategies that I've told you about, that we've been documenting, how they want to, from the White House, get some of these cases up to the court. But this conservative-leaning Supreme Court is rejecting one of those bids. This is not the final act, but it is a huge, important, key step, and a step that Trump lost. He basically wanted the court to side with him in a bid to defund and go after these USAID contracts.
Despite every effort to calm him down, the reality of the ruling hit Trump faster than he could rage tweet "witch hunt" in all caps. This wasn't just another legal setback, it was a full-blown disaster. His legal defenses were collapsing, his political future was in serious jeopardy, and his ego had taken a hit it might never recover from. Every case he was tangled in, election interference, classified documents, the "I barely knew them" fake electors scheme, just became that much harder to escape. His entire legal strategy had always relied on delay, evasion, and intimidation. But now, the Supreme Court had slammed that door shut. Even legal experts who normally defended him couldn't ignore the obvious. He should have seen this coming. Even his own conservative justices, carefully chosen like a reality show judge assembling an all-star cast, knew there were limits to legal gymnastics. And the worst part? This ruling didn't just affect one case, it set a precedent that could destroy every defense he had lined up for his upcoming trials. Executive privilege? Gone. Immunity? Gone. The endless stall tactics? Finished. The road was running out. And for the first time, Trump had nowhere left to turn.
The Supreme Court had the opportunity to say, we're either going to lay down and let Donald Trump do whatever he wants to expand the power of the chief executive, or we're going to stand up and be a legitimate co-equal branch of government and serve as the check and balance against not only Donald Trump's abuse and overreach, but Donald Trump running roughshod over the legislative branch, because this is money the legislative branch had appropriated for this purpose. I am really pleased to report that the Supreme Court stood up, stood strong. They're holding at the moment, and they told Donald Trump no. Now, this is a preliminary ruling, and obviously this is one battle in what will likely be a long line of battles over, Donald Trump's abuse of power. But